Right. So last week, he was elaborating on continuing on the episode of the outlook of organic societies. He was elaborating on the qualitative difference, between how contractual notions like responsibility, mutual aid, mutuality are from the ways in which organic societies perceive them. I'll just ask to mute yourself for now while I'm reading. Yeah, thank you. So he's exploring quite beautifully how our understanding of mutuality, of mutual aid, of all of these kind of things have moved from the kind of unconscious sense of collectivity, of responsibility that organic societies have had, into a more conscious, calculated kind of quid pro quo sense of mutuality and responsibility and reciprocity that we have. So we are continuing on this in this manner. I also posted in the chat where we're at. So if you're using the PDF, there is also a link there. It's page 58. If you're using the printed version, it's page 118. And the excerpt starts with contractual relations. Contractual relations, or more properly, the treaties and oaths that give specifiable forms of community life, may have served humanity well when compelling needs or the perplexities of an increasingly complex social environment placed a premium on a clearly defined system of rights and duties. The more demanding the environment, the more pre-literate peoples must explicate the ways in which they are responsible for each other and how they must deal with exogenous factors, particularly nearby communities that impinge on them. Need now emerges as an ordering and structuring force in institutionalizing the fairly casual, and even pleasurable aspects of life. One second. I just asked that anybody who is joining to mute themselves, because I think it's not automatic. Need now emerge as an ordering and structuring force in institutionalizing the fairly casual and even pleasurable aspects of life. Sexual, kinship, reciprocal, federative, and civil areas of the community must acquire greater structure to deal not only with the more pressing nature, but particularly one that includes adjacent communities taking out claims of their own to a common environment. Such claims are internalized by the community itself as a system of sharing. And not only do interests now arise that must be carefully and later meticulously articulated, but ironically, they also arise from individuals who begin to feel that they carry visible heavier burdens and responsibilities within the community. These individuals are the nascent oppressed, often women, and those we might regard as the nascent privileged. Men and women in pre-literate communities need each other not only to satisfy their sexual desires, but also for the material support they give to each other. Going into the show notes here. To the footnote, sorry. It is not always clear how pressing these sexual desires are from a heterosexual standpoint. My own studies of early sexuality suggest a degree of polymorphous perversity, to use Freud's perverse formulation as a communal phenomenon, and even more of bisexuality and homosexuality that would appeal even our own liberated age, that would appall even our own liberated age. So ubiquitous is this sexuality that what the anthropologists may discreetly describe as masturbation is in fact intercourse with all natural things, particularly animals. Hence, marriage may well involve more economic considerations and social bonds than sexual ones, and sexuality may be latent with a richer animistic meaning than we can ever hope to envision. The sexuality that imbues early techniques itself has not yet been fully explored, together with the way it defines work in preliterate societies. That reminds me a lot of the non-human sexes concept of Deleuze and Guattari. Okay, coming back to the text. Men and women in preliterate communities need each other not only to satisfy their sexual desire, but also for the material support they give to each other. Their marriage establishes a primary division of labor, a sexual division of labor with a sexualized economy as well, that tends to apportion hunting and pastoral tasks to men, including the defense of the community and its relationship to the outsider, and domestic food gathering and horticultural responsibilities to women. By a sexual division of labor, I do not mean merely a biological one, important as the biological dimension may be, but an economy that requires the very gender of the sex to which it is appropriated. Nor was it necessarily men who formulated the apportionment of the community's material activities between the sexes. More likely than not, in my view, it was women who made this apportionment with a sense of concern over the integrity of their richly hollowed responsibilities and their personal rights. Only later, the emergence of more complex and hierarchical social forms turned their domestic role against them. This development, as we shall see, was to come from a male envy that must be carefully unraveled. Sounds like he's like referencing scholars like Al-Khibri that was speaking about patriarchy as a source of male envy. At a low subsistence level and in a fairly primal community, both divisions of labor are needed for the well-being, if not the survival, of all its members. Hence, the sexes treat each other with respect. Indeed, the ability of a man or woman to perform well in this division of labor profoundly influences the choice of a mate and preserves the integrity of a marriage, which is often dissolved by the woman, whose responsibilities in sheltering, feeding, and raising the young visibly outweigh the man's usefulness in discharging these all-important functions. Given the woman's de facto role in the early community's social arrangement, our obsessive preoccupation with primitive monogamy seems almost preposterous if it weren't so plainly ideological and obfuscatory. The blood tie and the rights and duties that surround it are embodied in an unspoken oath that comprise the only visible unifying principle of early community life. And this bond initially derives from women. She alone becomes the very protoplasm of society, the ancestress that cements the young into lasting consociations, the source of the blood that flows in their veins, the one who nourishes a commonality of origins, the rearer who produces a mutuality of shared physical and spiritual recognition that extends from infancy to death. She is the instructress in the basic way of life, the most indisputable personification of community as such, conceived as an intimate familial experience. The young, who first see each other as kin, as common flesh, bone, and blood through their mother, later see each other with an intense sense of identity through her memory, and only faintly in the father, whose physical features they closely resemble. Which makes sense while so many of these communities were anything but monogamous, at least in the way that we conceptualize it. With the commonality of blood comes the commanding oath that ordains unequivocal support between kin. This support entails not only sharing and devotion, but the right to summon an unquestioned retribution on those who injuriously despoil the blood of a kin person. Beyond the obvious material needs that must be satisfied for survival itself, the claims of the blood oath provide the first dictates that the primal community encounters. They are the earliest communal reflexes that emerge from human association, although deeply laden with mystery. Community through the blood oath thus affirms itself with each birth and death. To violate it is to violate the solidarity of a group itself, to challenge its sense of communal mystery. Hence, such violations, be they from within the group or from without, are too heinous to contemplate. Only later will dramatic changes in the most fundamental premises of organic society make kinship and its claim a consciously debatable issue that are subject for ceremonial exploration. Footnote. Powerful as the Orestia may be psychologically to the modern mind, I would thus regard Aeschylus's trilogy, which deals as much with kinship as it does with mother rights and the claim of citizenship over those of blood ties, as a haunting Greek ceremonial rather than a well-crafted drama. Only now, perhaps in our defenseless isolation in an monad-like condition as socially alienated beings, can we sense the power of the trilogy over an ancient Greek audience that had yet to exorcise the blood oath and tribal costume from their enchanted hold on the human psyche. Maybe we take a moment to just contemplate a little bit because it's a long excerpt. A lot of what he's exploring here really reminds me the whole kind of notion of how the familial triangle, the kind of Oedipal complex of daddy, mommy, and me, which then translates into the marital institution of wife, husband, child, and of course the state, or the daddy, sky daddy of religion, and all these kind of triangular complexes. Before, it was just a system of death, a system of blood relations, a system of kin that has very little to do with the father as such, and more to do with blood connection that extends ancestrally through the mother. And I think that's kind of like an elaboration further on this difference between how these organic societies conceptualize reciprocal relationships beyond contractual arithmetics of calculation and justice and who deserves what and fairness, but rather kind of like an emergent sense of unconscious responsibility and collectivity that comes from blood connection and kin, which also extends not just to humans, but also to animals, to the biosphere as kin. Yeah. What do you guys think? Any reflections on here? Auntie, I see that you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. You're trying to speak? All right. I shall continue then. Mere reflexes, however, are too binding, too defensive, too rigid and self-enclosing to permit any broader social advances. They do not allow for a social solidarity based on conscious alliance, on further social constructions and elaborations. They constitute an inward retreat into a guardedness. They constitute an inward retreat into guardedness and suspicion towards all that is exogenous to the community, a fear of the social horizon that lies beyond the limited terrain staked out by blood oath. Hence, necessity and time demand that ways be found to place the community in a much larger social matrix. Obligations must be established beyond the confines of the self-enclosed group to claim new rights that will foster survival. In short, a broader system of rights and duties that will bring exogenous groups into the service of the community in periods of misfortune and conflict. Limited by the blood oath, allies are difficult to find. The community, based on association through kinship alone, find it impossible to recognize itself in other communities that do not share common ancestral lineage. Unless such lineage can be created by intermarriages that recreate the blood oath on a primal term of shared kinship, new oath must be devised that, while secondary to blood, can find a compatible tangibility in things. Claude Levi-Strauss's notion of the contrary notwithstanding, women are decidedly not such things that men can trade with each other to acquire allies. They are the origins of kinship and sociality, the ark of community and its imminent power of solidarity, not little pastries that can be savored and traded away in a Parisian bistro. And how, of course, so many anthropologists and sociologists imposed our own sense of ownership over women on the primitive societies. Even things, as such, do not suffice, for they suggest a system of accounts and ratios that stand at odds with organic society's practice of usufruct, which is a concept he elaborated previously, that is like a relationship with things like land, like houses, not through ownership, but through use. So something is so-called yours as long as you're using it, but never owning anything. Hence, before things can become gifts, I leave aside their late debasement into commodities. They first become symbols. What initially counts for early pre-literate peoples is not a thing's usefulness in the economy of organic societies, but its symbolism as the physical embodiment of reciprocity, of a willingness to enter into mutual obligation. These are the treaties that extend beyond the blood oath into social oath, the early elaboration of the ecological community into human society, the first glimmerings of a universal humanitas that lies beyond the horizon of a universal animalitas. As pre-literate communities extend their range of required relatives, the traditional kinship nexus was probably increasingly permeated by the social, marriage, reciprocity, the ritualistic adoption of strangers as blood relatives, and intra-community institutions like fraternities and totemic societies must have produced a
Hey,
slow...
Yuval, 1 second. I'm hearing an entire other recording.
Huh?
Think it's coming from Auntie? There's like a whole nother sound coming through.
I don't hear anything. Are you hearing it right now?
I haven't been able to hear anything while her audio's going.
But can you hear me, or do you hear anything other than what I'm saying?
I'm hearing you
hear-
and Auntie.
Yeah, both at the same time.
Why, that's so strange. She's muted.
Auntie's not on my end. Her audio's coming through. She's listening to something else.
She's muted though.
For me, it doesn't show her muted.
Yeah, right. Same.
Same.
Auntie, are you with us? Are you there? Okay, I think I'm gonna take you out of this meeting so we can hear each other. I wonder why I can't hear it. Strange. Is it okay now?
Sounds good on my end.
Yeah, sounds good.
So there was like an extra sound the whole time in the background.
Pretty much the whole time, yeah.
Oh man, why are you
It
telling me
would
now?
go in and out.
No,
Okay.
it was just like the last 3 or 4 minutes. It wasn't like from the whole beginning, at least on my end.
Okay. It is what it is, I
Right.
guess.
Like right after you paused.
Okay. Okay. Where were we? As preliterate communities extend their range of acquired relative, the traditional kinship nexus was probably increasingly permeated by the social, marriage, reciprocity, the ritualistic adoption of strangers as blood relatives, and intra-community institutions like fraternities and totemic societies must have produced a slow consolidation and layering of responsibilities, particularly in more dynamic organic societies that will be to be richly articulated by customs and rituals. From this social substance, there began to emerge a new civil sphere, parallel to the older domestic sphere. That civil sphere was free of coercion and command is indicated by our evidence of authority in the few organic societies that have survived European acculturation. What we flippantly call leadership in organic societies often turns out to be guidance, lacking the usual accoutrement of command. Its so-called power is functional rather than political. Chiefs, where they authentically exist and are not the mere creation of the colonizer's mind, have no true authority in a coercive sense. They are advisors, teachers, and consultants, esteemed for their experience and wisdom. Whatever power they do have is usually confined to highly delimited tasks, such as the coordination of hunts and war expeditions. It ends with the task to be performed. Hence, it is episodic power, not institutional, periodic, not traditional, like the dominance traits we encounter among primates. Our entire language is permeated by historically charged euphemisms that acquire a reified life of its own. Obedience displaced alliances. Command displaces coordination. Power displaces wisdom. Acquisition displaces giving. Commodities displaces gifts. While these changes are real enough historically, with the rise of hierarchy, class, and property, they become grossly misleading when they extend their sovereignty to language as such and take out their claim to the totality of social life. When used as tools in ferreting out the memory of humanity, they do not help to contrast present to past and reveal the tentative nature of the existing world and of prevailing patterns of human behavior. To the contrary, they assimilate the past to the present, and in the very presence of illuminating the past, they cunningly conceal it from our eyes. Let me read this part again because I didn't get it. When used as tools in ferreting out the memory of humanity, they do not help to contrast present to past and reveal the tentative nature of the existing world and the prevailing patterns of human behavior. To the contrary, they assimilate the past to the present, and in the very presence illuminating the past, they cunningly conceal it from our eyes. This betrayal by language is crassly ideological and has served authority well. Behind the inextricable web of history, which so often prevents us from viewing along developments from the point of view of their origins and backclouds us with the ideological of hindsight, lies the even more obfuscating symbolism of a language nourished by deception. For remembrance to return in all its authenticity, with the harsh challenges it presents to the existing order, it must retain its fidelity to the arc of things and attain a consciousness of its own history. In short, memory itself must remember its own evolution into ideology, as well as the evolution of humanity it professes to reveal. That part really reminds me of Zizek's The Event, the idea of the event, of how we have this kind of illusion of hindsight, like after the crash of the 2008, everybody knew that it's about to happen, or like everybody were like, oh, that's obvious. But we completely oversee the whole evolution of this kind of like minuscule things that happen right after another, that lead us eventually to the event itself, that are all part of it. And I think here as well is like, it's a bit like mind-bending to try to elaborate these organic societies through the language of our own terms, because the language itself is obfuscating the kind of unconscious realities that they experience. The remembrance that we want to invoke here of these earlier societies, if we want to learn anything from them, has to include the whole evolutionary process of these societies until now. In short, memory itself must remember its own evolution into ideology as well as the evolution of humanity it professes to reveal. We can't just go back there, explore them based on our own current terms. We have to see the entire progression. And I'm just going to read the footnotes. Lest I be misunderstood as contending that any current trends in linguistics, communication theory, and semiology have created the tools for the renewal of remembrance, I would like to emphasize that this work will be done by anthropologists and historians insofar as they remain sufficiently self-critical of their own use of language and its ever-changing historical context. Okay. What do you guys think? Any ideas, any reflections? What comes up for you as we were reading?
One thing that stood out was the way that language has replaced certain things. like obedience displaces allegiance and command displaces coordination. I also was struck by the way that he says what we flippantly call leadership in organic societies often turns out to be guidance. Anyways, I think overall just really interesting to see the power of language and its place in our understanding of our world.
Yeah. I keep in all of the readings keep mentioning what I'm reading in Deleuze and Guattari's work, because it's just very relevant. I think one of the most kind of exciting theories or discoveries that I made in Anti-Oedipus is how these different social machines flow into each other. And so one of the discoveries or the ideas that I made is how, first of all, they elaborate is like 3 different social machines in general. We had like the primitive social machine, which is what he's referring to as organic societies, the despotic or the kind of feudal social machine, and then the capitalist social machine, which we are all very familiar with. And they ask all kinds of explicit and implicit questions, such as how did that development evolve? How did they evolve into each other? How did that kind of transformation happen? And one of the things that I thought are very interesting that I elaborate is that throughout all of these social machines, the potential of a state as a concentration of power always existed in the horizon. It's just that the primitive social machine or the organic society had this conscious or unconscious or both kind of things in place to resist intentionally the formation of a state. And then once the despotic social machine came and they call overcoded the social codes that used to be inscribed on bodies, in tattoos, in rituals, rites of passage, all of these kind of, and what we also elaborated here a few pages ago, talking about how all of their ceremonies and rituals kind of emerged from Earth itself through the relationality, this unconscious connection. The despotic social machine came and overcoded them, so they turn all of these codes towards the despot, towards the king or the kind of the feudal lord or the feudal system. While the capitalist social machine decoded them, so completely dissolving them and axiomatizing them back and turning all these codes towards kind of freeing them, quote unquote, freeing these codes, but axiomatizing them back into what serves capital. I thought it's really interesting to think about this kind of the things that they had in place in organic societies to avoid the formation of a state, or what you can call power, right? A power structure. Like the whole existence of a chief was built in a way that resists the chief becoming more than a chief or becoming a chief, right? It was just this kind of like what he said. They are advisors, teachers, and consultants, esteemed for their experience and wisdom. And very similarly to what he said before about usurpactness, like things that are owned based on use and not based on like subjective individual ownership. In the same way, the chief is what he performs. It's a particular task that he performs. It's like, I have started this collective, I'm organizing and stewarding it, but I hold no power over it. Like my use here is the function that I provide, right? In this particular space. And so, yeah, just interesting to think about it in this sense.
What is the book you were referencing?
There is I reference multiple books. There is the Event by Slavoj Žižek. I can write it in the chat. And if anybody else has something to add, feel free to unmute and speak.
Well, I'm curious power is functional. What do you think actually stopped from becoming more concentrated? Was it like the chief's individual constraints that they're placing on themselves, or was it more community based?
I think it was definitely more collective. They didn't have a sense of individuality versus collectivity, just like they didn't have a sense of just versus unjust as a contradiction, as he elaborated before, freedom versus unfreedom. There was only freedom. There is only justice based on the ecological relationality. And I think in the same way, like all of these codes, all of these social codes emerged from this inseparable relationality with the biosphere that they inhabited, with the land that they inhabited and its forces. And part of it was how to relate, how to intentionally avoid power. So, for example, the Ruzengatari speaks specifically about how it was a system of debt, which is in their kind of idea relates to kinship. But also how, for example, they had these what to do with surplus. So a lot of these societies have these like rules in place of how to, for example, we're talking about chiefs here. So this is usually something referring to kind of North American tribes. They had like these anything that is surplus is destroyed, right? They would like compost it, burn it, like do whatever with it. And when you think about it, that's a very much a form of how to avoid concentration of power. Nobody can have more than anybody else. There is no one person that can hoard. There is no hoarding, right? There is what we need, and the rest we give back as offering. We burn. We do rituals with whatever. So that's one example, and I think they probably also he's not elaborating a lot here, but some other kind of things in place to make sure that a state does not form. The part about language, I wish he would continue. I hope he will continue exploring, because I'm personally very fascinated with linguistics as of late, and how language forms our collective experiences. And so moving with this knowing that the way that we speak and write and think and conceptualize organic societies is very much tainted by our own languages, colonial, post-capitalistic, languages of this social machine. So even our notions of reciprocity and mutual aid and justice and all of these things are very much tainted by the anthropocentric, kind of contractual, arithmetic, structure of things, of quid pro quo, in the way that we see things. When organic societies did a ceremony or gave an offering, it wasn't, oh, I give an offering to this deity representing this force of nature, so they will give me back what I need, rain or this or that. It was something far more unconsciously connected, unconsciously relational, and alive. I also like what we kind of glossed over it, but he mentioned something about sexuality that kind of stood up for me. And how, let me find it again. It's in the footnote there. It says, it is not always clear how pressing these sexual desires are from a heterosexual standpoint. My own studies of early sexuality suggests a degree of polymorphous perversity, to use Freud's perverse formulation, as a communal phenomenon, and even more, of bisexuality and homosexuality that would appall even our own liberated age. So ubiquitous is this sexuality that what the anthropologist may discreetly describe as masturbation is in fact intercourse with all natural things, particularly animals. Hence, marriage may well involve more economic considerations and social bonds than sexual ones. And sexuality may be latent with richer animistic meanings that we can ever hope to envision. The sexuality that imbues early teachings itself, early techniques itself, has not yet been fully explored, together with the way it defines work in pre-literate societies. And I think that is interesting because, there is a lot of emerging literature on, the whole monogamy, polyamory, what's more natural to human beings, and trying to find all these kind of earlier societies that practiced anything but monogamy, which is all well and fine, but still we are anthropocentric in the way that we explore it. We think that what would be polyamory or non-monogamy for us is the same that it was for them, but it's not. Their entire notions of sexuality were probably a lot more animistic, a lot more connected with the non-human realms of sex, or the non-human sexes, as Deleuze and Guattari said. They ask, what are your non-human sexes? Is one of the tasks of schizoanalysis, as they elaborated. What are your non-human sexes? And I think that's a lot. It's very connected to this, taking sex beyond the anthropocentric man-woman genitals thing. It's something, everything is sexing. Everything is desiring machines plugged into each other, connected, interpenetrates, influence, and evolve into each other, interconnected with each other. And so, yeah, I just thought it's very interesting, and I'm loving how much connection and parallels I can find between this and these other works. Exciting stuff. Does anybody else want to read another excerpt? Maybe Franco?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Anthropological etiquette requires that I occasionally sprinkle my remarks with the usual caveats about my use of selective data, proclivity for rampant speculation, and my normative interpretation of disputable research materials. Accordingly, the reader should read that by interpreting the same material differently, he was egotistical, competitive, hierarchical, and beleaguered by all the anxieties that plague civilized humanity. Having made this obeisance to convention, let me now the contrary. Careful review of the anthropological data at hand will show that communities like the Hopi, Wind, Ihalmute, and others cited here and in the following cultural, we find an organic society in which our modern values and traits prevail. This usually can be explained by unsettling technological changes, invasions, problems of dealing with a particularly difficult environment, and above all, by contacts with whites. Up decades of anthropological experience, research, and fieldwork, once observed, if I were asked to state briefly and succinctly what are the outstanding features of Aboriginal civilizations? I, for one, would have no hesitation in answering that there are three: the respect for the individual, irrespective of age or sex, amazing degree achieved by the concept of personal security, which transcends all governmental forms and all tribal and group interests and conflicts. These features can be summarized as complete parity or equality between individuals, age groups, and sexes, usufruct and later reciprocity, avoidance of coercion in dealing. Finally, what Reardon calls irreducible minimum. In Reardon's words, of every divisor in clothing.
Is it just me or Franco is breaking out for everybody?
Yeah, me
And
too.
moving
I've
to-
been reading along.
I'm hearing half sentences. Was it the same when I was reading? No.
No, it wasn't.
You hear me now?
I can hear you, but it's like coming in and out. I don't know if it's an internet connection or what. Maybe I will continue for now.
Yeah, sounds good.
These features can be summarized as complete parity or equality between individuals, age groups, and sexes, usufruct and later reciprocity, the avoidance of coercion in dealing with internal affairs, and finally, what Reardon calls the irreducible minimum, the inalienable right, in Reardon's words, of every individual in the community to food, shelter, and clothing, irrespective of the amount of work contributed by the individual to the acquisition of the means of life. To deny anyone this irreducible minimum was equivalent to saying that a man no longer existed, that he was dead. In short, to cut across the grain of the world conceived as a universe of life. I do not mean to imply that any existing primitive communities can be regarded as models for early periods of human social development. They are the remnant bands of a long history that has always towed them along ways far removed from an ancestral world that separated humanity from animality. More likely than not, the solidarity that existed in Reardon's Aboriginal civilizations, their high respect for the natural world and the members of their communities, may have been far more intense in prehistory, when there were none of the divisive political and commercial relations of modern capitalism that have so grossly distorted existing organic societies. But cultural traits do not exist in a vacuum. Although they may be integrated in many different and unexpected ways, certain characteristic patterns tend to emerge that yield broadly similar institutions and sensibilities, despite differences in time and location. The cultural facts of dress, techniques, and environment that link prehistoric people with existing primitive is so striking that it is difficult to believe that Siberian mammoth hunters of yesteryear, with their fur parkas, bone toolkits, and glaciated surroundings, were so dissimilar from the Arctic seal hunters of the Poncin's day. Ethical patterns that has fallen together here has a unity that justifies a number of related cultural inferences. Thus, the presence of female figurines, obviously laden with magical or religious significance, in the debris of prehistoric hunting camps or Neolithic horticultural villages suggests the reasonable probability that the community accorded women a social prestige that would be difficult to find in the patriarchal societies of pastoral nomads. Indeed, such a community may even have traced its lineage system through the mother's name, matrilineal descent. If Paleolithic bone implements are arced with cult-like drawing of animals, we have adequate reason to believe that the community had an animistic outlook towards the natural world. If the size of prehistoric house foundations is noteworthy of the absence of large individual dwellings, and the adornments in burial sites exhibit no conspicuous wealth, we can believe that social equality existed in the community and that it had an egalitarian outlook towards its own members. Each trait found singly may not be convincing support for such general conclusions, but if they are all found together and they are sufficiently widespread to be characteristic of an entire social era, it would certainly require a hard-nosed empirical outlook and an almost perverse fear of generalization not to accept these conclusions. You guys make of it?
I'm a super slow processor, which is why I'm so quiet, but I'm liking this this section of the book.
Yeah, me too. He's kind of he's doing the thing that he's talking about. You know how he said like about memory? What was it? Memory itself must remember its own evolution into ideology as well as the evolution of humanity in professes to reveal. Like, in a sense, it's exactly what he's doing. Like, he's starting the book from excavating the outlook of organic societies based on what we know, so we can perhaps better understand the context of where we're at. Right? It's the idea of the event as a infinitely stretched evolution rather than a momentary thing that happens. So many things that serve as the logical premises that are the bedrock of the capitalist social machine are all founded in complete misunderstanding of the evolution, the histories of human societies. You know, like the idea that humans are inherently greedy and capitalism is some kind of inherently emergent phenomena that was always there in some latent forms and just kind of became bigger the bigger the urban, you know, concentrations became. That cannot be farther from the truth. Some of these earlier societies were agriculturally and technologically advanced, lived in urban cities with hundreds of thousands of people in them, and still had equality, egalitarian outlook on life, and all kinds of stuff like he's describing. And so, how much more we can discover on ourselves and what possibilities lie ahead of us if we better understand where we come from, right? Like what.
It feels like we as society we have a very short memory and attention span, but then I remember that is by design. If I think back to all the history I've learned, it only goes back, doesn't actually go back that far, and it's from a particular lens. So it's I don't know, it's interesting to think if in the education systems, if we had more comprehensive history from a wider lens, how our understanding of the past would be very different than now.
Yeah.
That reminds me of, we do have very short memories, and it's because we've kind of cut off the connection to the past. I mean, we always, or at least in the past, there were these oral traditions that carried that information through. And now what we have is an education system that has been created to, enforce and continue capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I just had one more thought on that. I wonder if, like, somehow, in some way, like, um, a part of it, like social media, it's in some ways trying to take on a form of storytelling, because I feel like, I mean, there's obviously a lot of inaccuracy and fallacies on social media, but there is a lot of truths being shared that otherwise would not, um, we wouldn't have the opportunity to learn about from other people's perspectives around the world. And so yeah, it kind of feels like storytelling.
We are telling stories all the time. Yeah. We are casting spells and telling stories all the time. And we do well to explore what stories are we creating, what stories are we generating, replicating. Right, humans. Unfortunately, I need to cut this one a bit shorter today. I have a call coming up in like a few minutes. Anything else that wants to be said before we are logging off?
Thank you, Yuval.
Well, thank you everybody for joining our continuous reading of the Ecology of Freedom. Anybody who is watching it later through the recording, feel free to support me on Patreon so we can continue doing that sustainably. And if you are not already, join the Discord so you can join these readings live and all of the other beautiful things that we are doing here. See you in the next one.